Hi, I'm John Stevenson, and we're going to be looking at the Abrahamic Covenant in our continuing study of the book of Genesis. A while back, I shared this chart with you. It's a chart outlining the whole life of Abraham, and it starts off where he's called to leave his family. That's at the top of the chart, the promise of a seed, and then the sojourn in Egypt, and then Lot and Abraham, part company. They go through some negotiations, and then after that, in chapter 14, Abram has to go down and rescue Lot, and he ends up rescuing the people of Sodom as well. In chapter 15, we have the covenant ceremony where he does a sacrifice, and God promises descendants and the land. And then in the last section, in chapter 16, we have Hagar and a prophecy of the birth of Ishmael, and Ishmael is actually born in that chapter. We come to the central section, and this is why I'm taking you through this chart. We haven't been through all the rest, although I noted that the whole story of Abram is presented in parallel. So eventually we're going to see Abram and Ishmael again, in fact, later on in this chapter, where they're circumcised. Just as Abram had prepared a sacrifice for the covenant ceremony, he's going to prepare a meal in chapter 18, just as there had been that issue of Lot and Abram had rescued Lot. Again, we're going to see Lot and Abraham, and this time angels are going to rescue Lot. So just as back in chapter 12 there had been, she's not my wife, she's my sister, when Abram went to Egypt, he's going to be in Gerar, and again he's going to repeat that same lie. So the whole story is in parallel with each other, this chiastic structure, but the center point, which we have in green in this particular chart, is the Abrahamic Covenant. And when we come to the next chart, what we're going to do is we're going to expand just on that part that's here in green. So I'm going to make the entire chart in green because it's going to be those verses 1 through 22, maybe a little bit bigger than that. And chapter 17, verse 1, we start off where we're told that Abraham, and we're going to switch to that name now, Abraham is 99 years old. In verses 1 and 2, the Lord's going to appear to him, and God's going to make a covenant with Abraham, and in that covenant he's promising he's going to multiply him. Abraham's going to fall, he's still Abram at this point, he's going to fall on his face. And his name is now going to be changed to Abraham, and God says to him, I'm going to make nations of you, and kings will come forth from you. Next, we'll have and this is going to be the pivotal point in this chapter, where circumcision is commanded. And after that, we're going to have not Abram's name, but Sarai's name is going to be changed to Sarah. And she will be told that she's the mother of nations, and kings and people will come from her in the same way that they would earlier come from Abram. Abraham is going to fall on his face again. Now we're going to see a later incident where Sarai hears this news, but Abraham's going to fall on his face. He's going to laugh, and God's going to promise multiplication through Isaac and through Ishmael, in the same way that God had made a covenant with Abraham to multiply him. We're going to read that the Lord goes up from Abraham, so instead of appearing to him, now the Lord's going to leave. God's going to go up from Abraham. And again, there will be a statement of Abraham's age, and we'll be reminded again that Abraham's 99 years old, but it will be added that Ishmael is 13 years old as they receive circumcision. So that's an overview of this entire chapter, and right at the central point is the sign of the covenant, the sign of circumcision. Genesis chapter 17, verse 1 then. Now when Abram was 99 years old, the Lord appeared to Abram and said, I am God Almighty. Walk before me and be blameless. I will establish my covenant between me and you, and I will multiply you exceedingly. Now sometimes we say that there's no conditions of the Abrahamic covenant. And I suppose in a sense that's true, but notice it's prefaced with the command, walk before me and be blameless. That's actually part of the covenant relationship. Abram fell on his face, and God talked with him, saying, as for me, behold, my covenant is with you, and you will be the father of a multitude of nations. No longer shall your name be called Abram, but your name shall be Abraham, for I will make you a father of a multitude of nations. Now, that's a play on words, because Abram means father of high places, or exalted father, high father, however we want to take that. It's the word father and high next to it. And his name is going to be changed to Abraham, which sounds like the phrase Abhamon. So Abraham, which sounds a little bit like Abhamon, because I will make you the, and here he says it, Abhamon, the father of a multitude of nations. So it has that idea, even though it's not actually those words. It sounds enough like, for government work, father of a multitude. And I will make you exceedingly fruitful. Now, remember, Abraham so far hasn't been very fruitful. He does have a son by Hagar. I will make you exceedingly fruitful, and I will make nations of you, and kings will come forth from you. I will establish my covenant between me and you, and your descendants after you throughout their generations. So something's going to start with Abraham that's going to continue to successive generations for an everlasting covenant. It's not going to end. To be God to you and to your descendants after you. That's the part of the covenant. I'm going to be your God, and I'm going to be the God of all your descendants. I will give to you and to your descendants after you the land of your sojournings, all the land of Canaan, for an everlasting possession, and I will be their God. God said further to Abraham, now as for you, you shall keep my covenant, you and your descendants after you throughout their generations. And he's going to give them a specific duty, a specific sign of that covenant, which will be part and parcel with keeping the covenant. This is my covenant, which you shall keep between me and you and your descendants after you. Every male among you shall be circumcised. That's the surgical operation. This was already known in the ancient world. In fact, the Egyptians practiced circumcision. You shall be circumcised in sort of the cutting around the male foreskin. You shall be circumcised in the flesh of your foreskin, and it shall be the sign of the covenant between me and you. And every male among you who is 8 days old shall be circumcised throughout your generations. Now, that's different from what the Egyptians did. The Egyptians would wait until the young man was going into puberty. This is to be at infancy, at 8 days old. A servant who's born in the house or who's bought with money from any foreigner who's not of your descendants, he's to be circumcised too. A servant who's born in your house who's bought with your money shall be surely circumcised. This shall be my covenant. Thus shall my covenant be in your flesh for an everlasting covenant. But an uncircumcised male who is not circumcised in the flesh of his foreskin, that person shall be cut off from his people. He's broken my covenant. And so that covenant was to be kept from generation to generation. Now, there has already been a Noahic covenant, a covenant that God had made with Noah back in Genesis chapter 9. In that covenant involved men and animals and the entire world. It was God with the entire world, as opposed to this covenant where it involves Abraham and his descendants and those who were connected to Abraham. In the Noahic covenant, the sign of that covenant was a rainbow. It related to the entire creation. God put his bow, his weapon of war, in the clouds, and sort of hung it up over the mantle, as it were. That was the sign of the Noahic covenant. This covenant, because it's a personal covenant, because it's a family covenant, it's a very private covenant. You don't go showing it off. The sign of circumcision is circumcision, and it relates to Abraham's descendants, those who will come forth from his seed. In the Noahic covenant, that's a universal sign. Everybody looks at that. This is a very private and personal sign. Circumcision, then, involves a surgical cutting. It's a cutting around the foreskin. And it represented a spiritual reality. When we get to Deuteronomy, chapter 10, verse 16, we're going to see the Lord saying, circumcise then your heart and stiffen your neck no more. That is, what was true on the outside was also to be true on the inside. It was to be a sign of faith and repentance. Romans chapter 4, verse 11 tells us that this was a seal of righteousness of the faith which Abraham had while he was uncircumcised. That is, he didn't start believing the Lord here. He started believing the Lord way back in Genesis chapter 12, and now as a sign of that faith, that was to be put on his body. It was a sign of faith. Circumcision, then, was to the Abrahamic covenant what baptism is to the new covenant, because the new covenant today, the sign of faith for us today, is baptism. We are baptized to show that we have been connected to Jesus through faith. In the same way that in the Old Testament, under that Abrahamic covenant, one was circumcised to show that he was connected to the God of Abraham through faith. To summarize then, the sign of the Abrahamic covenant is circumcision, while the sign of the new covenant is baptism. In the case of the Abrahamic covenant, circumcision was a sign of faith. Likewise, in the case of the new covenant, baptism is a sign of faith. In the case of the Abrahamic covenant, physical circumcision represented the spiritual process of cutting away sin. So even though the outward sign was a sign that was outward, it represented an inward reality. Likewise, with the new covenant, water baptism represents identification with Christ and the spiritual cleansing that comes through the new birth. In the case of the Abrahamic covenant, circumcision was limited to males only. You only circumcise boy babies. In the case of the new covenant, there's no distinction in baptism between male or female. Both boys and girls are baptized. The promise, we're told, back in Abraham's day was to God's people and their children. You see, you circumcise a child even when he was 8 days old. You say, wait a minute, he can't believe yet. Well, that's okay, because it's his parents who believe, and eventually they will bring up that child believing those same promises. And in the New Testament, Acts chapter 2, Peter says to those new believers, this promise is to you and to your children. And that's why there are some traditions within Christianity who believe in baptizing infants as well.